Welcome to the Head Above Water podcast. This devotional podcast is designed to help you reach out to Jesus and keep your head above water.
Hello again, everybody, and thank you for listening to the Head Above Water podcast. Welcome back. For those of you who are looking for us during our Easter break, thank you for being here. For those of you that are new listeners, thank you for being here. We're continuing our journey through the Bible, and we've made it all the way to Judges. We've made it to Judges chapter 4, Judges chapter 4 is a story about deliverance. Once again, we find the Israelites in distress, this time at the hands of King Jabin of Canaan. Jabin has treated the Israelites harshly for 20 years, but once again, God hears the cries of his people, and he sends judges, Othniel, Ehud, and Shamgar, and then once again God provides a person with great wisdom and prophetic abilities, but it's someone unexpected. It's unexpected because it is a woman. Her name is Deborah. God was going to use a woman this time to rescue his people, which is quite unexpected in such a patriarchal society. So Deborah was living confidently in what God had gifted her, even though her calling was quite challenging. And because of her obedience, God blessed that obedience. She was faithful to God no matter what. God allowed Deborah to serve as a judge and would use her to rescue Israel from Jabin. So God guided Deborah to summon Barak, who God had appointed to lead the battle against Sisera's mighty forces, to free them from Jabin. That would not have been an easy message for Deborah it wouldn't be an easy message for Deborah to deliver, but she obeyed. Then Barak was not having it. He did not want to go, especially alone. Deborah agreed to go with him, because Deborah was willing to do whatever it took, no matter what, to do what God called her to do. When Deborah summoned Barak, she reminded him that God had a plan for defeating Sisera. God was giving Barak all that he needed, including the plans for the victory. And God would lead Sisera where he wanted Sisera to be, and then he would hand him over to Barak and the Israelites. All Barak needed to do was trust God and his instructions. So that was Deborah's prophetic message to Barak. Barak probably felt like it was a pretty difficult task to leading an army of people who had been oppressed for 20 years, who probably did not have a lot of weapons, against a vastly superior force. So the struggle wasn't with God's power. If God was powerful enough to do the job, it was whether the people would believe Barak. Barak was worried that he would not be I don't know if he was worried that he'd be not authoritative enough. He just was worried that people would not believe him. So he begged and pleaded Deborah go with him. But when it was time for him to step forward and lead the troops, what would he do? When Barak, when it came time for Barak to go into battle, to face Sisera, he said he'd only go if Deborah went with him. Yep, he would only go if Deborah went with him. But despite his fear, he obeyed with Deborah at his side, and he gathered the 10,000 troops, climbed up Mount Tabor, and when Sisera heard the Israelites had gathered there, he rounded up his chariots and his army and marched towards the outmatched Israelites. Obedient faith. Obedient faith in the face of fear is still obedient faith, right? Sometimes Christians believe that we're called to be courageous, and we are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't have any fear, because courage is not necessarily the absence of fear. It is fear controlled. Courage says, I cannot, but God can, so let's do it. And that's the kind of courage that God calls us to demonstrate, even just taking one small step of faith at a time. For Barak, the first step was having courage was going to Mount Tabor. The next step was to come down from the mountaintop and attack Sisera. Each step of faith God calls us to take is knowing that He will be with us, leading us, empowering us, gifting us. So being afraid is not an excuse for obedience. So how did it turn out? Deborah and Barak lead the army to victory over Sisera. And so what do they do next? They give God the glory. Thank you for being back with us on the Head Above Water podcast. We are planning to have more robust podcasts in the weeks to come. Thank you. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Head Above Water podcast. This podcast is a production of Midkiff Ministries for the use of our audience. The song Think Big is provided by Scott Holmes via Creative Commons Attribution License.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.